And you're very certain that this budget is very realistic?
By the special grace of God, is realizable.
Okay, let me quickly bring another thought here. An economist, of course, who can give us a sense of, you've been talking about the budget and the relationship between the executive and the legislature. Let's bring Mr. Bismarck Ruwani. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives, an economist, to bring us up to speed or give us a sense of what the implication of a possible change. For example, if the presidency wants to change the figure submitted in the for oil benchmark, for example, how will this turn out, or how will it pan out eventually on the budget document as a whole?
I think basically Nigeria has to focus on substance rather than trivialities. If there's a material alteration to the major input into our budget, which is oil, and that has changed, the president can at any point in time submit a supplementary budget, submit an amendment to the budget. But the important thing is that the Nigerian public has to come to terms with the reality that they face. This country has spent a lot of time on national delusion rather than national reality. And we find a situation where today the spot price is $27 a barrel. Our benchmark is 38. If because of this material alteration, Iran is going to start pumping oil as from tomorrow after the sanctions have been lifted, the president or the minister of budget and planning thinks that this is a significant development, they can call anybody in this National Assembly and alter the process. But the important thing is that if in reality our revenue is going to actually come down by as much as 30%, it would be irresponsible for any government to continue spending without bringing it up to the attention of the National Assembly.
A lot of people, I mean, it's the manner in which these ideas come to play. That's what a lot of analysts are talking about. It's political in the sense of how the relationship of the both arms of government should play out. But then, Mr. Ruwani, give me a sense of what these implications might be. For example, if largely we are still dependent on oil, although we are thinking the Buhari 2016 budget is looking at diversification and non-reliance on oil, but then largely part of it will still be on oil. Tell me, that oil benchmark, in figures and in realistic terms, what are the implications?
The benchmark is at 38. The spot price today is at 27 or 28. So, as we speak ab initio, there's already a 30% drop. But the benchmark is only a price which tells you that after this price, you begin to save money. What we should focus on is that the budget is an estimate of expenditure and revenue. If you now know that your revenue is going to fall this much, and the strategy to actually stimulate the economy out of a slowdown into recovery, it means one of two things. One, your expenditure will remain the same, but your borrowing will increase. By borrowing, it means that we'll borrow both from domestic sources and international sources. The international community are going to ask questions. What are your policies? What is your fiscal policy? More important, what is your exchange rate policy? Because Nigeria needs investments. If the exchange rate policy is not coherent, it is not clear, it is not consistent with the fiscal policy, then lenders will not put their money on the table. Investors will not put their money in the market. Then we will start from the beginning again. So these are very difficult times for the country, and I think it is time for people to go away from trivialities as to whether a document is there or not missing, to go to the actual, the reality that we face, which is that we have a major reduction in our major input into our revenue, which is oil.
I've been meaning actually to even ask you, Mr. Ruwani. The IMF boss came, Madame Lagarde came around, and the IMF has actually said that oil price might drop as low as $20 per barrel, different from what Nigeria actually speculated. And a few days after she left was when the issue of the missing budget came about. Could it be some level of reality setting in when the IMF boss left the shores of Nigeria, that the Nigerian government realized, oh, we need to alter a few things in this budget? Do you think?
I think that's conspiratorial and conjecture. The federal government of Nigeria is way above playing silly games with a document. Today, Standard Chartered and Morgan Stanley have put their projections for oil, the low point of oil price today at $8. IMF was talking about 20, we are talking about 8 today. So the situation is much more serious than document trail. How are we going to cope with a situation where the major input into our revenue is going to drop by as much as almost 75 to 80%, and we still want to maintain the same expenditure profile? That should be the discussion, not about where documents are and where documents. The president of Nigeria is competent enough to call the president of the Senate and the National Assembly and say, look, there's a material alteration to our projections. We need to make some changes, and he will have no apologies for doing that. And I think President Buhari is above playing silly games with a document. Let's focus on the main issues.
All right. So tell me, there are portions of the 2016 budget as presented by the president that a lot of Nigerians have some issues with. For example, the proposal for the Aso Villa, the presidency, for example, issues of buying vehicles, issues of capital expenditure for the Aso Rock Villa, the presidency. And a lot of Nigerians are asking the question, we're talking about cutting costs of governance. Why should we be having such an amount for the presidency, which is higher, for example, than what we had in 2015 budget?
I think that the question of cost efficiencies and cutting down on cost is very important. And the Nigerian public has a right to ask the president and the National Assembly to cut back on their expenses. We cannot be living like we had when our revenues were, when the price of oil was 95, when it was $100 a barrel, now that it's down to 28. We have to lead by example. I think that's the key issue. But more important is, how do we recover from this situation? Don't forget, in 1999, the price of oil was as low as $10 a barrel. If it goes to as low as that, this country will be technically insolvent and bankrupt. How do we get out of this cul-de-sac? I think that should be the discussion. There are major implications for jobs, there are major implications for security, there are major implications for investment, and there are major implications for the currency. There doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency. The currency, the gap between the official rate of 199 and the parallel market of 310 is over 100 naira. That is indicative of the fact that people are speculating, one, or people have lost confidence to the point that, okay, let me take my money out at any price. I think that there's a fundamental issue of a lack of confidence, there's heightened uncertainty, and to a large extent, there's high risk.
All right.
So we need to get all of these things together to manage the situation, in a very mature and professional manner.
All right. Not, before I allow you to go, Mr. Bismarck, Riwani, tell me on this note, just briefly though, a lot of people, personally, I've looked into that budget. Every year, the National Assembly has a 115 billion budget. And there's no details to that budget every year, and it's like that. Unlike every portion of the budget document, which is detailed on how it's going to be spent. But for the National Assembly, we do not have the details. What are your thoughts on this?
I think I agree with you that there must be information on what the National Assembly is spending or what the Legislature is spending. And you have to correlate that to their productivity. How many bills have been passed? How many laws have been passed? And what have they done actually in terms of productivity? I think the country is overgoverned. The total number of legislators in the country are far in excess of what is required as an optimal situation. But I want to refer you to what happened in Venezuela in the last 3 days. Venezuela declared an economic emergency for 6 days, and all hands are on deck. That is, the National Assembly passed on all the powers back to the president and said, please get us out of this bind. 60 days, we want to see the results of how you're going to manage this thing. Right. The inflation figures just came out tonight. For December, the inflation figures are 9.6%. The top of the range for inflation in Nigeria is 9%. If you go to 9.6% now, what is going to happen after the various adjustments? There are things like that. Growth is coming down. Inflation is going up. The misery index is high. There are many things to talk about than talking about, what is spent. But I agree with you that the National Assembly, the presidency, and even the judiciary have to cut back on what they spend compared to what they were spending before, because our revenues have dropped by as much as 75%. You cannot increase your expenditure on your maintenance. It is not possible. It is not even,
thank you so much,
it
Mr.
is immoral.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Aruwani. Many thanks for coming on the program. We'll have to leave it at that. Thanks for being on the program. Well, let me come back to you briefly before we go on the break. Honorable Namdas, you've heard him.
Yeah.
We need to cut back because of this current situation on the ground. Do you believe so?
I think I agree with him, Kuma, but I want to let you know that we've been cutting down on the budget. It's not as if it has been 115. In 2015, the budget was 150 billion. And when there was issues from the public, it was 30 billion was cut off, making the assembly with 120 billion. And in this year's budget, 2016 budget, 5 billion is cut off. You have 115. So it has not been static in any way.
But there has not been details into it.
We even now have a budget office that can give you the details. But I must add something here, that people should understand that in 1999, the National Assembly, in 1999, it's not the same that you have in 2016.
What has changed?
Because we really have, in those days, we don't even have National Budget Office, we don't have National Assembly Service Commission, you don't even have National Institute of Legislative Studies.
Do we need all of these things? Because you're gulping money.
We actually
are in a down economic situation.
We actually need it because the National Institute of Legislative Studies is making a lot of researches and helping in assisting to make good laws for the country, and that is very important. And therefore, even the staff strength has risen from 1999 to 2016 has increased. So you can see it's not as if it is static. When they started in 1999, each member of House of Representatives and Senate had 2 aides. Now we have 5. So it has to increase.
Before I allow you to go, Honorable Namdas, tell me, there are proposals to amend the Nigerian budgets. The 7th Assembly did that. The 8th Assembly wants to restart that exercise.
You mean a budget? We're talking of the Constitution.
I'm sorry, the Constitution, the Nigerian Constitution, amendment of the Nigerian Constitution. Yeah. And a lot of people will be asking the question. About 3 billion naira was spent on that process in the 7th Assembly. Again, the 8th Assembly wants to go on that.
No, in reality,
at this very situation, is it realistic?
In reality, it was even 4 billion. It's not even 3 billion that was spent. But I am telling you, this very one is taking the amendment from where we stopped. We are not starting everything altogether. It's not as if we start. It's not as if we are starting everything new. It will continue. You take the last amendment, and you continue, and you open up, and then you get other proposals, and you amend the Constitution.
So the confab report has no place
the
now.
The Constitution cannot just even in the U.S. as how many years they still amend their Constitution. So I think we will do that for the good governance of this country.
All right, it's a pleasure talking to you, Honorable Abdulrazak.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on the program. He's a spokesperson of the House of Representatives, Honorable Abdulrazak Namdas, and he's been talking to us on the relationship of the executives and of the legislature. We take a moment now, and when we return, I have a guest who will be coming on the program. You don't want to miss this portion of the show. Stay with us. We'll be right back.